Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead. It's the Tuesday Night Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Tuesday Night Hustle. Here are your hosts, Drake and Dwain McFarland.
Hey, Tuesday night! The kids are in bed, the beers are cracked, and it's time to hustle with some fantasy football talk. Straight from FightingChanceFantasy.com, I am Brian Drake, joined alongside the analytical assassin, Dwain McFarland. What's going on, my friend? How's life in Texas?
Man, doing good. Was outside grilling yesterday and, cooking some steaks for the family. I put my grill lid down. I'm looking on the top of it. I think we had our snake talk last week. I could see where there had been a giant snake sitting on top of that grill. You could see where the dust was, where it had crawled across the grill. So, we're doing good, Drake, down in Texas. The snakes are out. The heat is out. We got mosquitoes going everywhere. It's awesome. It's a good time to stay inside and do a podcast. I'll tell you that.
I'm glad I don't have to shovel right now here in Syracuse, but goddamn, that is freaky shit right there. I don't want to deal with snakes, but welcome in, everybody. This is the Tuesday Night Hustle. If you're new to the show, I'll kind of give you the lay of the land here. So I'm the bus driver, okay, and I take you down the road of what we're talking about, and Dwain is the engine, all right? This is a high-stakes fantasy player who's won some pretty big money in contests such as the Football Guys Players Championship and is going to show you a little peek behind the curtain tonight on how he makes his projections for the fantasy football season. Tonight we're going to do the AFC North, and you're going to get the inner workings of Dwain's high-stake mind. So if you're just the average casual fan out there and you wonder, hey, how do these guys go win these big tournaments? Well, now you're going to find out. So we're going to listen to Dwain. You can follow him on Twitter at Dwain McFarland. Spell his first name D-W-A-I-N. You can follow me at Drake Fantasy. Read our work over again at FightingChanceFantasy.com. And Dwain also does a lot of good stuff over at MattWaldmanRSP.com. We'll give him a good shout-out. If you don't have the rookie scouting portfolio, what are you doing? Get on board and download it. You're missing out in these rookie dynasty drafts. Come on. But anyways, we're going to get into the AFC North. If you weren't paying attention or just totally forgot, the Baltimore Ravens won this division last year. From a fantasy perspective, everyone's down on the Ravens, okay? It's a team that wants to run the ball. It's a team that has literally no chance of throwing the football, or so they want you to believe. John Harbaugh's still the coach. Marty Morningwig is there as the OC. What is this team all about, Dwain? They gave up the fewest points in the league last year, and that's kind of what helped them become the identity that they are of leading the NFL in rushing attempts. They had 19 rushing touchdowns. They had 4.5 yards a carry, which is good for 12th in the NFL. This is a team that totally changed their identity from week 11 on. They went from Joe Flacco and their kind of throw the ball around offense to Lamar Jackson, and we're going to rush for an average of 229 yards a game. That's insanity. So from week 11 on, they went 6-1, but they ran for 229 a game. That's nuts, Dwain, and only threw for $156. What is the outlook this year when you look at their offensive identity? Let's start with Lamar Jackson. And is there any hope that he's going to turn into an NFL caliber passer?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. You made a lot of really good points. One thing to go back to really quickly is what you mentioned about the defense. So the defense last year played really well. And as we've talked about on some of the past podcasts, whenever it comes to doing these projections, one of the things that's harder, and you'll hear a lot from the analytics guys, on Twitter as well, the N+1. So when you're trying to predict next year based on how things went this year, it's not as good whenever you're working with projecting defense versus offense, because defense is truly such a team. And it's not that offense isn't a team game. It is. But defense is truly so. I mean, you could have the best pass rush ever, and one breakdown in coverage all of a sudden makes this great play, look really bad. And so the ability to sustain great defense from year to year is tough. The other thing you got to remember with the Ravens is they've also lost C.J. Mosley, Terrell Suggs, Eric Weddle, Zadarius Smith. Those are huge, huge names to be losing. Now, some people will say, oh, those guys are old, or there's just a tackling linebacker or this or that. Yeah, but they've been playing together. a long time. There's a lot that goes into continuity and chemistry, and those guys were all consummate professionals. So it'll be interesting to see. One of the things I'm looking at as I think about the Ravens this preseason, right now I have them weighted to be a more heavy run team. But one thing you definitely want to be, looking at and really monitoring injuries and, how things are going is going to be around their defense. Now, it's not like they stood pat. They did go add Earl Thomas. So now you've got Jimmy Smith. You've got Marlon Humphreys, a first-round pick from 3 years ago, and you've got Earl Thomas behind them, and then Brandon Carr has played really well as their other cornerback. So they have a really good secondary. Where they're going to be a little bit more susceptible, I think, is in the front seven. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But for right now, my projection around the Ravens is that, they're going to try to lean on the defense, and they're going to try to play this kind of exotic, smash mouth kind of football. Something we heard about from the Titans 2 or 3 years ago, right, that just never completely panned out that they wanted to do with Mariota. Well, now, this is kind of being reinvigorated by the Ravens. Now, one thing to look at is, you had mentioned Marty Morningwig. They did offer Morningwig an opportunity to stay on. Is
he going? Or did I somehow miss my man Marty?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, but they promoted Greg Roman. So Greg Roman had been.
He's a guy that loves to run the football.
He'd been an assistant head coach basically the last couple of years, and he really had his fingerprints all over this offense from the time that Lamar Jackson took over. And I think that's part of kind of why Marty was just like, thanks, but no thanks, because this offense really isn't the kind of offense that Marty wants to run, right? He's more about that West Coast style offense. So Greg Roman was promoted to offensive coordinator, and you just mentioned Roman as a run guy. So he's never topped 55% passing ever in his career. And that's including teams that he was the OC for that won like 6 games. So usually, the more, and this is something we've talked about on past episodes, the more you lose, the less, or the bigger your margin of the bigger margin that you're losing by, and the more often you lose, the more often you're actually going to be passing. But he's one of those guys that actually sticks with the run anyway. So here are his pass percentages: 51, 55, 49, 48, 51, 45, 47, 48. So this is a team, when I look at it, even though the defense lost some folks and you start trying to piece together, what do they want to do? Well, they make Greg Roman their main guy. Their quarterback is a quarterback that runs. This guy has a long history with rushing quarterbacks. He's worked with Colin Kaepernick and Tyrod Taylor, both which he made successful for who they are. And then we look at the other offseason moves, right? We look at the fact that they go and they add Mark Ingram. They get rid of the 2 receivers that they had that are dependable, and they go replace them with younger, cheaper contracts. And they bring speed into the offense with Hollywood Brown. And I think about the way that they're building out this team. Everything to me screams that their plan is to run the ball and try to make big plays in the passing game, which they hope that Hollywood Brown will bring. But let's not forget, they did have a different Brown last year that's just as fast or maybe even faster when he first came into the league as Hollywood, and that's John Brown. And once John Brown, and we'll get into this more in a minute, but John Brown splits before and after Lamar Jackson, took over, it's not pretty. And so whenever I think about this team, it's not a team overall that I'm going to want to own a lot of the passing parts to. The running parts are okay. But even if you look at their quarterbacks, who are their quarterbacks? You got Lamar Jackson, you got RG3, and Trace McSorley. They're all basically the same kind of guy. They're really built more around their run game. So overall, I think this is the team that's going to run the ball. The Vegas has them at 8.5 wins right now. The one good thing about this offense is it's a bit of I wouldn't call it an up-tempo offense, but it's not your league average kind of 950 to 925 play offense. They'll try to run 975 to 1,000 plays. They want to kind of keep the defense on their heels. And so there's going to be some volume, to go around. That will help some. But if you think about, to your other question there at the end is really around Lamar Jackson. And that's where, a big component of how well this offense is going to do is going to come down to the quarterback. And I actually went back and watched the last 5 games of Lamar Jackson last week. I watched every snap that he took, watched every throw that he made. I even charted them all, as, a short throw, intermediate throw. Was it left? Was it center? Was it right? Was he under pressure? Was he not under pressure? And the thing that I started to notice as the trend and what I looked at is he was really pretty good in the short and in the short intermediate areas. And then even deep, he was good in between the hash marks. So, and that's where I think he and Mark Andrews developed some chemistry down the stretch. late in the season. But what I really notice is for his receivers, for like timing routes on like 15, 20-yard outs and things like that. It wasn't that he didn't have the arm strength. He does, but his anticipation on those kind of routes, it just wasn't there. So what I saw is a quarterback that has potential. I think his accuracy can be good, but he's still learning how to read the field. He's learning how to, if a route demands that it's got a timing aspect to it versus a see it and then I just throw it, he seems to struggle because a lot of routes in the middle of the field, the seams and the crossers, those are, I see it, I throw it. Out routes, comeback routes, hitches, things like that on the outside, those are the passes that he struggled with the most. And his accuracy actually on those kind of passes was really bad. And it wasn't just so much about placement. Again, it was more about timing. So I think the good news for Lamar Jackson is that's probably something that you just have to work on, because when you're in college and if you're just a really good athlete and maybe you have a couple of other better athletes around you, you can get away with that. But then when you get to the league and everything's so much tighter and the windows you're passing into are smaller and those sorts of things, I think that can make it tougher. But overall, like on the throws where he knew where he was going, I thought his accuracy was really good on all levels, short, medium, and deep. Deep, I wouldn't say, deep was where I did definitely, even whenever he saw the pass coming open, I did see him. He was pretty inconsistent there. But you got to remember on deep passes, which is passes over 20 yards, even the best guys in the league, like if you're at 40, 45%, completion rate on those, or, even in the high 30s, that's pretty good. A bad year is when you're in like the 20% range. So for Lamar Jackson, I do think that there are a lot of questions. And so for right now, I've got his yards per attempt at 7. I've got his yardage at 3,400, and then I've got him at 18 passing touchdowns and 12 interceptions, which everybody's gonna be like, wow, that's not very good. And it's not, but whenever you add everything up, we've got a coordinator that wants to run. We've got a team that's built like they want to run. We've got a head coach that's a defensive-minded guy that wants to play tight games. I just don't see a ton of upside for the passing offense and for Lamar Jackson. Now, having said that, I've got him at 850 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns, and he basically almost had that already just in however many games it was that he ended up playing last year. So
yeah, he ran for 695 and 5.
And exactly. So he has upside in the run game. Now, something I've heard you talk about in the past, and I think we even talked about it, in this dynasty league that we're doing together. Lamar Jackson is one of the names that we discussed. And I'm along with you. I have some concerns about his size. He's not built like Cam Newton. He's not built like Dak Prescott. He's not even built like Colin Kaepernick or Russell Wilson. If you look at him, he's very smallish in his legs. It's more almost like he's got a slender build down low. It's not these big, huge thighs and big, glutes or any of those things. He's fast, but he's almost built more like a Michael Vick, which if you think about Michael Vick through his career, elite athlete, but also played hurt or missed a lot of games due to being injured. Robert Griffin, who sits behind him, is another similar one, built the same way in his lower body. And that's just something that we've seen in the league. I don't have stats on it, but it's something that when you look at it, you've seen that with running backs, are the same way. Those guys that are built that way down low, you want to just see somebody that's thicker. So I do have some injury concern with Lamar Jackson, but I think his rushing game is where it's going to be at for fantasy. And right now, his ADP is at 145. So pretty much everybody's out on the guy. And if he were to play all of his games this year, I've got him at 320 fantasy points, and most of it's based on his rushing yards and rushing touchdowns.
Is this a guy you are comfortable taking as your QB1 in a 12-team fantasy league where you start one quarterback?
No, I don't want him as my QB1, but I think I like him as my QB2 with upside, because if for some reason, we got to remember he's a young guy. He's only going into the second year. I saw enough positives when I was watching him to feel like, he could progress and grow into, being able to push into those other areas of the field where he was having some accuracy issues or some timing issues last year. There was enough there to feel good about it, but it's not something that I can say, oh, well, it's a 70 or 80% chance that's going to happen. To me, I don't know how to even put a percentage on it. Because I'm not some film expert that watches every single play and evaluates quarterbacks, and it's not like something I've done for 20 years. It's just something I've done for fantasy over the last 10 years. So my thought process is I like him as my QB2. At a minimum, he gives me viability as a rusher. And if I've got a bad matchup or a bye week, I can plug him in. If he grows as a passer by some chance, I mean, you could argue that you're looking at a guy that could slip into the top 10, maybe even the top 8. But still, your problem is going to be if everything's going really well for his offense, they're going to be running. So volume is still going to be a challenge, and there could be weeks where he doesn't need to hardly throw it at all.
We play a game during the regular season on our Tuesday Night Hustle show called basically Either Or, where I give Dwayne a choice. You have to take this guy or this guy. You have to draft one of these two running quarterbacks. Who would you rather have, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson?
Man, that's a good question. I think I would go Josh Allen. I haven't done the Bills yet, so I've you know where I'm at in my projections. Mm-hmm. I got the NFC East and the AFC East left. Those are the two divisions I haven't done. But having said, without watching it, I'm going to take that back, because what I did see from Lamar Jackson is when he could see the throw and knew where it was, he was accurate. I can't say that for Josh Allen. I saw many plays, because I actually watched Josh Allen quite a bit last year, and there were quite a few times where he clearly saw what was happening and then missed his guy, by like 10 yards. It wasn't close. So that would actually push me towards Lamar Jackson. Now, as far as the players around them, you might give Josh Allen a small edge right now, because he's got guys that, he got one of Lamar Jackson's guys, John Brown. Then they added Cole Beasley. Those guys are veterans, so they know what they're doing. But I think the upside of these other guys, might be a little bit higher. So I would give it to Lamar Jackson by a smidge.
Talking about the guys around Lamar Jackson, at the running back position, we mentioned in the open to the Ravens segment here that they led the NFL in rushing attempts. So they had Gus Edwards and Alex Collins. Those guys are gone, and with them are over 1,000 rushing yards. In steps Mark Ingram. How do you project him, and where in the, let's say, second round do you think he becomes the player you need to pull the trigger on?
Yeah, I think you meant Javoris Allen is gone, but Gus Edwards is still there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Buck Allen. It's, if you've paid attention, I was signed today in New Orleans. But Gus Edwards, the Gus bus is done. And Alex Collins is taking his dreadlocks somewhere else.
But for Ingram, here's the way I see the backfield shaking out right now. This is something to monitor. I think Mark Ingram takes over the role that Gus Edwards had at the end, which once they went, with Lamar Jackson, they were running a lot of RPOs, things like that. They wanted to have a bigger back because Lamar then became more of the speed, edge guy. They wanted the guy they're handing it to be the guy that could take it, through the A or the B gap, right, and really just gash a defense. So Mark Ingram is a perfect fit. And the way I see this shaking out right now is Mark Ingram becomes, the 1A. I think the secondary back, they want something a little different out of. They want a guy that can work the passing game more, is more of a change of pace guy. And I think right now that's Kenneth Dixon. Now I think there's the backups to those two guys. Mark Ingram's backup is Gus Edwards, and Kenneth Dixon's backup is Justice Hill. That's the way I see it for this season. And a year from now, right, Kenneth Dixon could be gone. We could be talking about Justice Hill as being the guy to own in the Kenneth Dixon role. Now, we also have to remember Kenneth Dixon has been hurt basically his whole career. So Justice Hill is a guy that could have some fantasy value down the stretch. Back to your question about Mark Ingram, I really like, obviously, the volume that they're going to have as far as, the number of rushing attempts. I've got them at 488 rushing attempts, and I'm just looking right now. I think that is my second highest, behind only Seattle. Yeah, I've got them projected as the most rushing attempts in the league, only behind Seattle. Now, you got to remember part of that's going to go to Lamar Jackson, but I've got Mark Ingram at 45% of those carries. In a normal offense, you would project Mark Ingram at like 55 to 60%, but you got to remember that there's going to be a portion of this that's going to go to Lamar Jackson. So right now I've got Mark Ingram at 45%, so that's 219 carries. I've given him a healthy yards per carry because they were well over 5 last year. And if you look at Mark Ingram's ability to break big plays and his style and the way it fits into this offense, I actually think it's a really good fit. But I've got him at basically 1,050 yards, and I've got him at 55% of their touchdowns. This is the area where I think this is the most sketchy part of his projection.
Absolutely.
You could, because Lamar Jackson could siphon away a lot The only reason I haven't taken away more is because what we talked about with Lamar Jackson's size. I think to some extent, they don't want to treat him like a Cam Newton. Right?
Exactly.
They just go throwing him into harm's way because down there, when things get tight, I mean, you saw last year, I can't remember who it was at the end of the somebody hit Lamar Jackson really good at the end of the year, and I can't remember now. It was in one of the playoff games. It was in the playoff game. It was the Chargers. I can't remember who it was that delivered the hit, but I saw the coaching staff on the sideline just like, oh no, hand that off. Don't run with that. So right now I've got Mark Ingram at 55%, but it could easily be 45. And that's the tricky part with Ingram. Right now I've got him at 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. But if he doesn't get that 9 touchdowns, because he's not going to be a big factor in this passing game. He's just not. I've got him at 5% of the targets, 24 catches, 120 yards, no touchdowns. So Mark Ingram right now I've got at 190 points, and ADP is 41. So he's a tad, in my mind, he's a tad overpriced. And the reason why is if you look at where I've got him graded as far as his floor and his ceiling, I've got his floor at 160. I've got him graded at 190, and his ceiling is 225. But that ceiling, I don't know if you read my notes over here, but the ceiling is really tied to the fact that you're 100% counting on Gus Edwards not really having a role. You're counting on Justice Hill not having a role, and it really just being more about him and Kenneth Dixon and Lamar Jackson. So to me, he's a guy that I don't see him probably hitting that upside I have him projected at. I think 190 is to 200, 210 points is about the most you can expect. But I think the downside that he carries, I just feel like there's a lot of questions, because Lamar Jackson could take more at the goal line. These guys could get more involved. They also last year kind of had a hot hand approach. All of a sudden, it'd just be like out of nowhere, Gus Edwards, bye, Alex Collins. Oh, you were averaging 4.5 yards as well, but bye, you go sit down. We're just going to put this Gus Edwards guy in, and of course, Alex Collins ended up finishing the season out on IR, I believe. But it's just a situation that I feel like they're, although the volume's going to be there, I don't see it being anything where they're just going to be like, oh, Mark Ingram here, you're going to get 60, 70% of the work and just run with it. I think there's going to be some volatility.
So gone are John Brown and Michael Crabtree, and with them are 197 available targets. In steps Marquise Hollywood Brown and Miles Boykin. Do those guys come close to replicating the numbers of Brown and Crabtree, or is it really just everybody hands off anybody in this Ravens offense who's not a tight end? And let's not forget, when we get to tight ends also, Hayden Hurst was a first-round draft pick. Everyone dismisses him like he's some piece of garbage.
Yeah.
But with these wide receivers here, how did you project them? Are any of them worthy of a flyer pick in a redraft league?
Yeah, I mean, quick note, the way I think about Baltimore is I can't wait to watch them from an NFL football perspective because they have built a diverse set of talent. They've got 2 tight ends they like. Really, they've got 3 that they like that they can move around. And that's one thing I noticed when I went back and watched those games. I was like, man, if you were to just go look at their sets and see, oh, here they ran this many tight ends and this many receivers, you would think they were coming out heavy. No, they were spreading the field. They've got, Mark Andrews running all over the place in motion, and then they move Hayden Hurst in motion after him. They had him on the field together. They were moving John Brown around. They're moving the running backs around. It looks more like a spread kind of offense where they're trying to spread, like we talked about a little bit with, what Cliff Kingsbury wants to do. But they were moving these guys outside the hashes, doing all sorts of things to spread the field out. So I'm actually really excited about watching them. My problem with a guy like Marquise Brown is what we talked about earlier. They had John Brown. John Brown isn't really a slouch. Yeah, he's been a guy that's been injured. But John Brown's projected stats last season, using the handy dandy, game split apps over at RotoViz, with Lamar or with Joe Flacco was on pace for 60 catches for 1,072 yards and 7 touchdowns. And that would have been a catch rate of 50% because he's targeted so deep down the field. He's a deep threat, like a Will Fuller kind of guy. So you now look at that with Lamar Jackson. He was on pace for 18 catches, 260 yards, and 2 touchdowns with a 26% catch rate. John Brown and Lamar Jackson just did not mesh. He was still trying to target him, but they were asking John Brown to run. Lamar Jackson's best routes I saw were seam routes and slant routes and then just little dump outs to the flats. Like he threw all those routes really well, and they ran tons of combinations of those. The little routes, like you used to see this even on Madden 10 years ago, where the two tight ends run straight to the flat and the outside receivers run slants. And it's just a simple read. You're reading the way the safety lines up, and based on him, you're reading one side of the field or the other. That was kind of their bread and butter play. Well, that's not something John Brown did well. He did not do well with contested catches. Even when Lamar Jackson would put it on him, a lot of it wasn't Jackson. It was John Brown wasn't fit to play that role. What we don't know is Hollywood Brown. My concern with Hollywood Brown is, 160 pounds. Is he really built to run those kind of routes? Like he, to me, is a guy that, yeah, that'd be great if he caught it and then he makes four guys miss and he runs off, on a 50-yard scamper for a touchdown. But he's also going to take some really big hits. So I'm concerned, based on the things I saw Lamar Jackson do well. Does Hollywood Brown really fit that? Now, again, Lamar Jackson could have gotten better. Maybe he's doing some other things better. But if I'm trying to get Hollywood Brown the ball, I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to create more space for him. It's not so much about slants and things like that. That's always going to be one of the routes you're going to run as a receiver to keep a defense honest. But, that could be a problem. The cool thing about, Hollywood is I do think that Greg Roman and the coaching staff, you hear them. And again, we talked about this over the last two podcasts. The things that you read from the transcript right after the draft is a lot of times one of the most honest assessments or, of a coach laying out what their plans are around a player. Now, what may come to fruition or not depends on how OTAs and then camp and all that goes, and can the player pick it up. But I was encouraged by what I saw from Greg Roman. They talked about moving him around inside, outside. They want to use him short. They want to use him deep. He talks about really only being limited by their imagination. And he even goes on to say, we have our system, but there's going to be a lot of things that grow off of that, especially on game plan, even if it's stuff at the line of the scrimmage or if it's behind the defense. And so I think that the coaching staff, from what I can tell, they have a plan for Hollywood Brown. So that's good. I don't think they're just going to try to make him do one thing. I think they see him as being John Brown. I think they saw as being a guy that could stretch the field, but they see this guy as being a guy they can move all over the place. So right now I've got Hollywood ranked as their number 2 receiver. If you watched last year, the first look almost every time for Lamar Jackson is Willie Snead. He loves Willie Snead. And Willie Snead, what I noticed, they have a good feel of the game together. Snead knows how to sit down in those zone looks. If all of a sudden it's man, he's got enough quickness to break away. And Lamar Jackson depended on him heavily. I don't see that changing in year one. I've got Willie Snead as the lead target. Here's the problem. It's going to be spread out, even though he's the lead target. So I've got him at 20%. And we already talked about 488, passing attempts. Well, I've got him as a 50-50 team right now. So 488, passing attempts, 488 rushing attempts. So 20% is not a lot. That's only 100 targets. And if you're only averaging 10 to 11 yards a catch, that's 665 yards. And then also Willie Snead did nothing in the red zone, which is killer. So, I've got Willie Snead at 665 yards and 3 touchdowns. Hollywood, I've got at 17% of the targets, but I've got his catch rate at 50% because I anticipate him working downfield a lot more. But 17 yards a catch versus 11. So that puts him at 40 catches for 700 yards, and then he's got 5 touchdowns. And then right now, the thing to monitor is I don't know who's going to be after that. Not that it's really going to matter much, as you kind of get the picture here, Drake. I don't really want to own any of the passing weapons in this. Now, if I'm in a dynasty, I don't mind Hollywood Brown, because if the offense grows or if they really create an opportunity for this guy where he's getting all sorts of looks in all sorts of different ways, he could find a way to overcome the volume issue. But overall, it's just not a team that I'm targeting the offensive guys. Like you said, Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews, both really good tight ends. But how do you project them? I saw a guy the other day on Twitter, and I'm always interested in different takes, but somebody said Hayden Hurst is going to be the number 4, not Hayden Hurst, Mark Andrews is going to be the number 4 tight end in fantasy. And when I start thinking of things like that, and dude, Mark Andrews has great chemistry with Lamar Jackson. Those two guys, I saw multiple times, like little hitch routes or little, these little inside release routes, like you stop on the hitch and all of a sudden you release outside, and they were in perfect timing together. But even if you gave, this guy 20% of the targets, which he's not going to get, he would struggle to be the tight end 4. I've got him at 14%. or 12%, and I've got Hayden Hurst at 14%. So it's an offense. Like I said, it's going to be fun for the NFL. I look forward to watching it because they do have a lot of different weapons they can use, and they can line up in all these cool formations, and they're going to try to run the ball more than people think they should, because everybody says you should just pass now. So I'm interested to see how it works out. But from a fantasy perspective, when there's going to be low passing attempts and then there's 6 to 7 guys you're going to spread the ball around, I just don't see there being a lot of value that you get from a fantasy aspect, other than Mark Ingram and potentially Lamar Jackson. I think Kenneth Dixon is not a terrible late round pick, but I wouldn't anticipate if Mark Ingram went down that Kenneth Dixon just gets the ball. I think Gus Edwards then becomes the slasher in the mold of Mark Ingram, and Kenneth Dixon is still the change of pace back with maybe a few more touches.
So let's move it over now to the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a team that was ravaged by injuries. Andy Dalton only played in 11 games. Joe Mixon missed a couple games. A.J. Green had a horrible year, only playing in 9 games. So we saw the emergence of Tyler Boyd. He now wants a new contract. This was a team with a really bad defense. They finished 6-10. As you know, they were 30th in points allowed and 17th in points scored. So Marvin Lewis, he gets the boot. In comes what to me seems like a soap opera name, or I don't know. I love that it was Zach Taylor. It just seems like maybe it's a Friday Night Lights quarterback or something like that. It's his son. Who knows? But Cincinnati was a disaster last year, Dwayne, and I think there's some really good value to be had in the Cincinnati offense, possibly mostly with A.J. Green, because everyone's going to be down on him. Oh, he's old. He gets hurt all the time. I'm an A.J. Green fan. I think if you can get him in the 3rd round now, that's fantastic. Dalton, before he got hurt, was playing all right. He was putting up okay numbers, and Joe Mixon, behind a bad offensive line, still ran for almost 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, and caught 43 balls. So let's look at the Cincinnati Bengals now. Where's the value? What do you think is going to happen in terms of A.J. Green coming back? And let's lay the whole thing out for the Bungles here in the AFC North.
Yeah, I do think there's some value. Like you said, big question mark with this team is Zach Taylor. So if you read some of his transcripts, from the time he first took the job, and then, what they talked about after the draft, he comes from, the Rams. He's been under Sean McVay, and he has openly said that, it would be silly for him to not try to implement basically the Rams scheme because it works so well. So you're talking wide zone running, lots of play action, lots of boots, and a lot of 11 personnel. So trying to spread the field out a little bit and bring a strong running game. So I think this is really good for Joe Mixon. I think it's really good probably for AJ Green as well, because I think you're gonna be in an offense. And it's not so much that last year actually the offense before all the injuries hit, like you said, Andy Dalton was doing pretty well. AJ Green had put up a few good games, and then you had the emergence of Tyler Boyd. So it was terrible, probably a little bit of misfortune, for that staff last year. All the injuries hit, and it was just time because Marvin Lewis had forever. But back to Zach Taylor, I don't see anything negative about the offense they're going to run. To me, it all seems positive. Now, this guy's never called plays in the league. So that's always, an adventure to see what happens, because, there is a lot to not just calling plays, but knowing when to call what and how to set up your opponent, and that's what a lot of the really good play callers do. So he's not going to have that kind of experience. He's going to be learning on the job. But yeah, I do like AJ Green. I like Tyler Boyd. So let's talk about, I guess, Andy Dalton, first. And Dalton's just a guy that, people every year, I feel like it's him. And, Phillip Rivers is obviously better than he is, but it's like you mentioned last episode. It's like Phillip Rivers, nobody ever wants him. Andy Dalton's the same way. And what's interesting, if you go look at Andy Dalton and his touchdowns per attempt and his yards per attempt and all those things, they're really all good. His problem is he just throws too many picks. And if the structure of the play breaks down and he has to operate outside of it, that's bad for Andy Dalton. But guess what? This is the type of offense that's great for a quarterback like that, because you could probably say the same thing about Jared Goff last year. I think we may have even mentioned that in the first podcast. When things went as designed, Jared Goff was great, and this offense is all about great design. whenever it kind of fell outside the structure of the play and then he needed to do other things, unless it was just finishing his boot, where he's just scrambling to the sideline and waiting on a guy to come open. I would call that still within the structure of the play in this offense. This is an offense that's built for a guy like Andy Dalton. And everything I read about Zach Taylor and what else can he say? I mean, that's an argument you could say. He's very positive about Andy Dalton. I think Andy Dalton will be, I'd say he's a shade below Jared Goff because Goff obviously has some upside. But just as a pure passer, I mean, he's probably close to it. So I think it's an offense that Andy Dalton, can run. Of course, they brought in Ryan Finley in the 4th round. He's a guy that they really liked. So he's a guy to keep on, your dynasty radar. I don't think it's anything to think about this year. But Andy Dalton, even though he's pretty much just an above average quarterback in this scheme, I do like the potential, because if you think about the weapons, you got Joe Mixon. So there's a high-end weapon. You've got A.J. Green, if healthy. There's a high-end weapon. And then Tyler Boyd emerged last year as being kind of a B-plus option. So when you have an offense that has 3 nice weapons like that, and then now, honestly, you're going to be running a scheme that could allow – if John Ross is ever going to break out, this is his year, because this offense is built for a guy like him. This is built for him to play the Brandon Cooks kind of role. It's built so that they're keeping 3 receivers on the field all the time. They're not going to be running 2 and 3 tight end type sets, a lot of that crap. They're going to try to spread the field out. So this will be a chance for John Ross, even if it's more of a tactical, hey, I'm going to push you down the field all the time to open things up underneath for Tyler Boyd or for Eifert or Drew Sample, or if it's, just so they can't double A.J. Green all the time because I'm just enough of a threat that you do have to worry about me breaking open deep. So I think, to your point, if you look at, A.J. Green, or actually let's go with Joe Mixon first. Joe Mixon, was honestly amazing last year. In the year before, he had been hurt, if you remember that. He got hurt early in the year, and then he came back and he played through it, and their offensive line was atrocious. Mm-hmm. And he was only averaging a 15-yard run or longer on 3% of his attempts. And so the offensive line improved some. He became much more efficient, running more north-south instead of the east-west kind of deal. And now you're going to have him coming into this new scheme, which is designed to make passes and runs always look the same. And so I think that's a really good thing for Joe Mixon. Right now, I've got him projected at 285 carries. That's 70% of the team carries. I've got him at 1,290 yards, and then I've got him right at 10 touchdowns. That's on him. I nearly pulled that back a little bit just because, the Bengals – Vegas has the Bengals right now. What did I have them at? Vegas has them at 6 wins. I don't see them the way I see the Cardinals. I don't see them the way, I see some of these other 6-win teams that Vegas has projected. And the other thing is I don't see a threat to Joe Mixon as far as, anyone, taking any of those touchdowns really away from him. There's not a runner there like David Johnson's got to deal with. I've got a team projected at 6 wins, and I'm going to have Kyler Murray running in 4 or 5 touchdowns that David Johnson will never see. You don't really have that issue with Mixon. The other thing is, like you said, they were so injured and banged up. This is a team that I think has a shot at 7 or 8 wins. They're in a division where, the Browns are favored to win it, but the Steelers are kind of an 8-8 team. The Ravens are 8-9 win kind of team. They could break either way based on their defense, and does that running game work? So it's a team that you could easily see, even if they only win 7 games, they could be right in the mix of a lot of those games. And so I think that bodes well for Joe Mixon. I've got Gio Bernard at 20%. Gio Bernard really became nothing last year. Everybody was so worried. Even me as one of them. It was hard for me to take Joe Mixon in the second round because Gio Bernard, just has always had a role. And last year, they just really went away from him. Now we've got new coaches in there, and I do think Gio will have a role in the pass game. But I think Mixon has established himself as one of the elite backs. A.J. Green, I see obviously he's going to be the lead target in this offense. But if you'll notice, I've got A.J. Green at 24% of the work, 22% to Tyler Boyd, and then 12% to John Ross. And then I've got a little bit spread across the tight ends. I've got Tyler Rafford at 8%.
Let me ask
go ahead.
If this is kind of Rams light, how would you put the Bengals receivers into the roles of the Rams? Who's Cooper Kupp? Who's Robert Woods?
Yeah, that's where I'm headed. So like the 24%, AJ Green's at 24%. And so, I mean, he's the lead guy, but he's more of an alpha than Robert Woods. Like the lead receiver on the Rams is 22%. And then you got the next guy at 20 and the next guy at 18. So I see more of a gap. I've got a 24, 22, 12. I see Tyler Boyd playing in the Cooper Kupp role. He's going to play the slot. And, he played great out of the slot last year. So I really see those two guys being more the 1A, and then it's not even a 1A, 1B. It's really more of a 1-2. And then you've got John Ross playing a tactical element. And honestly, I mean, I think Joe Mixon is the next guy, even in the passing game. He's probably at 12% or so. And then I've got Gio at 8. That's the thing that Zach Taylor walks into. If you think about what Sean McVay's talked about, and that's why he drafted Darrell Henderson. Oh, I've always wanted this change of pace back that I could mess around with. Well, Zach Taylor has that immediately coming into this role. So yeah, I see AJ Green is really he's going to work the Robert Woods and some of the Brandon Cooks role, depending on how successful John Ross can be. John Ross will have the chance to have that Brandon Cooks role. I don't see him being targeted as much, and then Tyler Boyd's the Cooper Kupp guy.
Can we hope for anything out of the tight end position here from Cincinnati? Tyler Eifert hasn't really been healthy in a number of years. They say this year they're just going to limit him. He's just going to be running routes. They're not going to have him in blocking. Like you said, they have Drew Sample, CJ Uzoma, who got a lot of run last year. Any hope for anything from this position?
I think there's potential. Tyler Eifert, if you notice, I've got a kind of a key at the top. He's a guy that I have underlined because I just don't understand I don't have clarity around what his role is going to be at this point. So I'm going, and I have John Ross underlined as well. So I see one of those two guys emerging as the, third, fourth option in the passing game. I don't know which one it's going to be yet. I've got John Ross ranked slightly higher because Tyler Eifert is coming off of a major injury and he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And because we know they want to run 11 personnel, well, John Ross fits that more. Now, if John Ross isn't up to the task and Tyler Eifert looks really healthy, we could see them all of a sudden say, you know what, we're not just going to run 11. We're going to switch it around, but we're going to use Eifert as somebody to operate more out of three wides. The problem that creates is, where's Eifert going to operate? He would need to operate in the area that Tyler Boyd is already really good at. So right. If things go as planned, I would see John Ross, AJ Green lining up outside most of the time. You got Tyler Boyd in the slot. And if they're saying they're not going to put Eifert in, a lot this year, because I haven't read all of that, and they're not going to make him block, that could actually be really bad for Tyler Eifert. That could mean the 8% I've got him projected at could be potentially high, because if the Rams are the team that stay in 11 personnel more than anybody in the league, and if Cincinnati tries to copy that, and if Eifert's not going to be doing any of the inline work, that's really bad.
You're listening to the Tuesday Night Hustle. We're found on fightingchancefantasy.com. I am Brian Drake. You can follow me on Twitter at Drake Fantasy. And the guy with all the answers here, that's Dwain McFarland. You can follow him at Dwain McFarland. Spell his first name D-W-A-I-N, McFarland, and you'll get a lot smarter by reading his Twitter feed. What we're doing here is we're breaking down the AFC North, and now it gets fun, folks. We've got the two boring teams out of the way, and look who's walking down the pike. It's the old Cleveland Browns. These aren't your winless Fathers Browns. Nope, this is Freddie Kitchens coming in with Baker Mayfield, Todd Monken running the offense. Some guy named Odell Beckham's in town. Nick Chubb, Jarvis Landry. Holy smokes, Dwayne. We've got a fantasy bonanza on our hands here in Cleveland. So really anything they did last year, I don't know how much of it you take and keep for this year, because the addition of Beckham alone just blows this whole thing up.
Yeah, but I mean, the good news is what they did last year without Beckham, once you got rid of Hugh Jackson and that just trash, he went from a 6.8 yards per attempt to a 9.1, talking about Baker Mayfield. That's insane. His pace over those last 7 games, 4,473 yards, 39 touchdowns, and 16 picks. That's before Beckham. So if you think about Kitchens and what he does, he comes from the Bruce Arians offense. That's where he grew up, was with the Cardinals. And at the end of his time with the Cardinals, he was there before Arians got there. But once Arians was there, that's really where the fingerprints of what he wants to do on offense, came to life here. And you saw that right away, because what does Bruce Arians do? He pushes the ball down the field. Well, then who was brought in as the offensive coordinator? Todd Monken. Todd Monken's the same way. He wants to push the ball vertical down the field. You saw it last year in Tampa Bay, whether it was Jameis Winston or whether it was Ryan Fitzpatrick. So this is going to be an offense that, is going to be it's going to be distributing the ball probably mostly. I would say, obviously, Beckham's going to be the lead target here. But then you've got a great guy to move the chains with Jarvis Landry. You've got a really good running back in Nick Chubb that just can threaten defenses with his big playability and his ability to keep the chains moving as well. And then you've got a lot of positive vibes coming out of OTAs and everywhere else around Antonio Callaway, that this guy is all of a sudden woke up and decides that he wants to take football serious. And then we've got David Njoku, who, he struggled some with drops last year, but he's an elite athlete. Right. And he can stretch the field and do the things they want to do. He can work the seam of the defense. He can quickly be by a middle linebacker. So, and then you think about Baker Mayfield's mentality, right? It's just kind of that, you almost think of him, I swear, he reminds me so much of like a Brett Favre. He's just like, oh, you hit me and you knock me down, I'm going to get up, and I'm going to shake your hand for knocking me down, and then I'm going to cuss you and I'm going to throw a touchdown the next play. This is going to be an offense that's going to be, really fun to watch. Unfortunately, we live in, 2019, where in fantasy football, everybody already knows this. Think back in the good old days, Drake, 15 years ago, you show up and only two other people in your league really are on to the fact that Cleveland's going to kick ass. They're all, everybody's just sleeping. You just take all these guys. But, the whole community's all over it. Baker Mayfield himself, if you look at his current ADP, he's sitting at 51. So, he's going right in the same areas where you got to take Andrew Luck. He's six picks away from Andrew Luck. You got Aaron Rodgers going at 52. He's one pick away from Aaron Rodgers. So people are all over this. People have got, the Baker Mayfield, bug. Everybody wants to take him. Everybody wants him to be part of their team. So unfortunately, guys like this you could get him in the 8th and 9th rounds of your draft. Right now, he's just being, and I don't want to say overhyped. I've projected the guy for, 4,700 yards passing with 36 touchdowns. I've got him at a touchdown on 6.25% of his throws, which is only behind, that's even with Pat Mahomes in the current rendition, which is what we project to be Tyreek Hill-less. But it's much to do about what you said. I've got weapons that can work every single area of the field, and I've got a quarterback that showed, extreme growth in the second half of last year, and a quarterback that was elite in college as well. So I just don't see a way that Baker doesn't end up as a top 6 quarterback unless, he gets hurt or just, totally just falls on his face. I just don't see it happening. So Baker's a guy that I've got at, 340 fantasy points right now. Which is second on my board.
We haven't really talked about this yet. We'll do it more as the summer goes on and we break down mock drafts and whatnot.
Sorry, third on my board because I got Deshaun Watson ahead of him, but I got him third.
Sorry. Where is the sweet spot for you in terms of taking a quarterback? When you see these numbers that Mayfield can put up and the weapons he has, are you willing to pull the trigger on a quarterback in the 4th, 5th round?
No, just because it's what we've talked about. There's even though there are guys that are going to finish, below that at 300 points, I'm talking about a 40-point drop-off, right, between him and some of the guys that we've talked about last week. So the delta between these players is just not high enough, and then the demand is not high enough because a lot of teams only want to carry one quarterback. You'll have some owners in your league carry 2. There's so many good ones right now. This may change in 3 or 4 years whenever Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers and Ben Roethlisberger – some of these other guys are when that old guard, Eli Manning was even in that in the past, when they're finally gone, and we've probably kind of taken them for granted. I think some of these other guys under them are a little more shaky, but even like a guy like Jameis Winston, even though he's not a great NFL quarterback, he's a good enough fantasy quarterback. I've got Jameis Winston projected at 300 points, and I can get him in round 15.
It's impossible.
I got Baker Mayfield at 340 and I got to take him at like 5. It's just, it's not a good trade-off because the receiver or the runner that I can get where I take Mayfield is going to be 200 points better than the guy I'm going to get in the 15th round.
And you can't trade a quarterback in a normal redraft league. Nobody wants to trade you a quarterback. They're like, well, I'll just go to the waiver wire and I'll pick up, like you said, Jameis Winston.
So every year, though, what happens is when these new guys come onto the scene, and you and I will do a full breakdown of ADP and stuff in a much more coherent way. A lot of this is talking about these teams. There are going to be quarterbacks to target this year, and I've already seen them. There's guys I'm super excited about. Now, Mayfield's a guy that I'll draft enough teams that if he falls, and all of a sudden, I don't want to take him in the 5th round. I don't want to take him in the 4th round. I probably will never take him in the 6th. But if all of a sudden, if I'm in a draft and he falls to the 7th or 8th round, that's when you pull the trigger. Let it come to you, right? Because you never know what's going to happen. Some guy may love Mayfield and take him in the 4th, and he's feeling like an idiot whenever you get Aaron Rodgers in the 8th. I see that kind of crap happen all the time. I don't want to be the guy leading the charge on quarterback. And the other thing is, when you think about Mayfield, and as much as I love him, it is his second year. He's still got to go do it. And the Browns are going to, unfortunately for them, most teams that are up and coming like that don't have to deal with the pressure that they're actually going to have on them because people are starved for the Browns to be good, like you said. You started it with, this is your daddy's Browns. Well, everybody's saying that. That's going to put pressure on them as a team. John Dorsey has done a really good job with the draft capital and the equity that he's been given by Sashi Cohen. I'm not here to debate about who's worth more, Sashi or Dorsey. I think Dorsey obviously knows what to do with the picks more. Sashi did a great job of accumulating them, so let's just call them good business partners, even though they're not truly business partners. But the way I look at it, this team has done so many things, from going and getting Jarvis Landry last year to having the 2 top picks last year in the draft, to then getting Nick Chubb in the 2nd round, to then landing Odell Beckham Jr. this year in the offseason. Man, it's like a soap opera. It's totally set up for everybody is watching. Everybody wants to see what's going to happen. And the expectations are that they're going to win. I mean, even Vegas has got them at 9 wins. For a team that, struggles to win 5 over the last, 15 years, that's big expectations even from Vegas.
Speaking of big expectations, a guy you may have to pluck at the end of the 1st round is Nick Chubb. In his 9 starts, he was 4 yards short of 1,000 yards, had 8 touchdowns, and caught 20 balls. Last year, once Carlos Hyde was traded, I don't think there was a show beating the drum more for Nick Chubb than this one. Where do you have him going this year? What are your projections like? Would you like to grab him in the 1st round if you're picking 10, 11, 12?
I prefer not to have to take Nick Chubb in the 1st round. Now, it's going to sound bad because I love Nick Chubb. Last year, after Hyde was gone, which you were just mentioning, his pace was 280 carries for 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns. The problem is the catches. 32 catches, 238 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I mean, on 32 catches to score 3 touchdowns passing, it's hard. You can't turn around and project that again the next year. So I've got him projected at 70% of the carries, which gets him 300 carries, 1,400 yards. I've got him projected at 12 touchdowns, which is one of the higher touchdown projections I have, because I don't get crazy with touchdowns. But again, only 6% of the targets. And in a PPR or in a half-point setting, it's going to be hard to take Nick Chubb at the end of the 1st round because of that. Now, if you're in a standard league and you're not getting points for PPR, Nick Chubb is an end of the 1st round pick. Absolutely. But if you're playing in a PPR league, I like Nick Chubb mid-second. If you're playing in a half-point, PPR, mid-second is probably okay as well. And a full-point PPR actually towards the end of the 2nd round is more where I'm probably targeting him. And it's hard for me because he's a guy that I love so much. But right now, Duke Johnson is still sitting on the roster. Mm-hmm. And then even if they get rid of Duke Johnson, Kareem Hunt is coming back after week 8. And if Kareem Hunt I don't think Kareem Hunt is the threat to Nick Chubb. Like you'll hear some folks, oh no, Kareem Hunt's going to come. No, Kareem Hunt is nowhere close to Nick Chubb. Let's just settle this right now. Kareem Hunt was a nice running back that landed in a great scheme, sitting with Andy Reid in the Chiefs.
That was a 3rd round pick.
I don't know how good Kareem Hunt is on any other team. I just don't. He's a nice player. And he's a good receiver out of the backfield. So my point there being, even if they get rid of Duke Johnson, come week 8, I think the role they try to work Kareem Hunt into is giving Chubb a breather, coming in, spell him every maybe 4 series, but really in the passing game is where Kareem Hunt, because Kareem Hunt is a really good blocker, A, in the passing game, and 2, he's got receiving chops. So I think that's the problem I have is the upside for catches. Now, if Duke Johnson does get out of the way here in the next several weeks, because he's basically crying. He wants to leave. He's ready to go. He wants his binky because now there's all these good players around him, and he's not really a big part of the game plan. And he's not. He's not a big part of the game plan. Tactically, he's a great player for them to keep because he could help them win games. But from a fantasy perspective, there's just no room for him. And he's obviously a guy that, and I get it. He's in his 5th, 6th year in the league, and he was a decent running back in his own right coming out. If he leaves in the next couple of weeks, and we know we get a full 8 weeks of Nick Chubb with no Kareem Hunt, then you got to move him up your board, because then, all of a sudden, you're probably looking at 10 to 11% of the targets, even if Kareem Hunt takes over, some of that role later.
Odell Beckham's added to the mix, and that's, I think, going to greatly cut into Jarvis Landry's 81 receptions from last year. I don't think he comes close to that. What did you project for Landry? How do you put Beckham in the mix, knowing also that Beckham never plays a full season?
Yeah. With Beckham and the injury thing, I'm not to the point where I just say Beckham can't, because we have seen, we've seen him do it, and his upside is so huge. Right now, I've got him projected at a full season. The other thing, I think Odell, he's motivated right now, right? He's happy. He likes where he's at. So one thing to say here, and we talked about this, several months ago, whenever this trade, first went down, but Beckham obviously is the number one wideout in fantasy, but this is an offense that once Hugh Jackson left, they didn't force it to any one guy, because up to that point, we were running the Todd Haley offense, which Jarvis Landry, which we were promoting, was playing the Antonio Brown role. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the role they cast Jarvis Landry into, and the targets were coming, right? And we were seeing it every week, 25%, 30%, 35%. Once Haley was gone and Hugh Jackson was gone, that all changed. They were no longer, giving, Landry that heavy workload. Now, Landry isn't Odell Beckham Jr., but it is a slight thing to think about, because if you think about guys like Julio Jones, you think about, here's my favorite receivers, and we'll get to one of them in a second. My favorite receivers for this year are DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, and Juju Smith-Schuster, because all of them are going to get 30% of their team targets. And they have upside for touchdowns. They're going to get their yards. Beckham does not have that. Beckham is an outside shot to get at 30%. What Beckham gets, though, is he has, at 25%, that's healthy, but he's got a quarterback that's a great fit with what he does. I've got him at 14.5 yards per catch. So I've got Beckham at 143 targets. That's 25%. And so that's healthy, but that's not the top end where you see the top guys go. And then 1,281 yards. That's 14.5 yards a catch. But where Beckham separates is his ability to score touchdowns. Mm-hmm. I've got him at 35% of the touchdowns. Now, with Landry, I've got him right at 20% of the targets. So he's well below Beckham, but I've got him at 78 catches. And the reason why is now Landry, to your point, Landry isn't going to see the volume that he saw last year, but now with Beckham working those deeper and intermediate areas of the field, Landry will go back to working the area that he used to work in Miami, which is underneath. So now his average depth of target is probably going to be 8 to 10 yards. Well, what happens whenever you're that close to the line of scrimmage? Your catch rate shoots up. And so
you're not going against top corners anymore.
Right. So while when I originally thought about Landry, I was like you. I thought, man, he's going to be lucky to get to like 60, 65 catches in my projections. But once you go through it all and you think about where he's going to be operating from and how his catch rate can go up, 5, 7, 8% versus where it was last year, he's going to be around 75 catches, and I've got him at 11 yards per catch. So I've got Jarvis Landry at 900 yards and 5 touchdowns with 78 catches. I think you're looking at a true 1A, or the 1 being Odell Beckham and a very strong 2 being Jarvis Landry. And then the rest of it being spread out across Antonio Callaway, David Njoku, Rashard Higgins might be sprinkled in a little bit. And then if Duke Johnson is around, obviously he gets a little bit.
All right, we're moving on to the final team. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They didn't make the playoffs, finishing 9-6-1, and maybe you've heard about them in the news in the offseason. Oh, I don't know. They lost Antonio Brown. He was shipped off to Oakland, and Le'Veon Bell is now a New York Jet. So it's rare that a football team can lose such transcendent players in an offseason as they did this year. Again, Bell didn't play last year, but he was on the team. So this team didn't have trouble scoring points. They had a porous defense, especially after Ryan Shazier's nasty injury. They never really replaced him, and I think this year in the draft they did with Bush. So Big Ben did Big Ben things. He threw for 5,000 yards. He's threw 34 touchdowns, 7.6 YPA. The big beneficiary of all this is your man Juju Smith-Schuster. Last year, 166 targets, and he still put up 1,400 yards, 111 catches, 7 touchdowns. That's basically as the 1A, 1B, let's call him 1B, to Antonio Brown. Those are sick numbers. So he's a monster. And then at running back, you've got James Conner. He started 12 games. He's almost put up 1,000 yards, scored 12 touchdowns, 55 receptions. That's what we need to see out of Nick Chubb. That would be fantastic if we can get 55 catches out of Nick Chubb. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, Dwayne, where are we going here with this team after so much turmoil? Are they still the same high-octane offense? Where do you go here, the Randy Fitchner and the boys?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Losing Antonio Brown is going to be huge. They already dealt with losing, Le'Veon Bell last year, so we saw that they were able to do that, but that was with Antonio Brown. What I will say with Fitchner's offense is, and I think this goes back to some of the issues that, came about even between Le'Veon Bell and Big Ben and then Antonio Brown and Big Ben, is it's the Big Ben show. Last year, without a strong offensive coordinator in his ear, this is a team that threw the ball 67% of the time and ran the ball 33%, despite, having a margin of victory at 4.3. So this is like a, analytics team. Everybody says, oh, just throw. But they still only won 9 games, right? Right now I've got them projected at 60% pass, 40% run. They also run a lot of plays. I've got them projected for the second most plays in the league at 1,025. I've got the Colts at 1,050 right now. Your Eagles will come in somewhere around there too. They run a lot of plays. So as far as this offense goes and fantasy goes, man, there's a lot of value to be had, and it's because of what you talked about. I've got efficiency going down some for Ben. His touchdowns I've got going down because, I'm not going to disrespect Antonio Brown that much, right? I think quarterbacks obviously matter more. But I've got Roethlisberger at 65% completion, 4,300 yards. I've got his touchdowns per attempt at 4.5%. He's easily been at 5.5 and getting up into the 6s. So I brought that down because of Antonio being gone, but I've still got him at 28 touchdowns. So 28 touchdowns, 15 picks, 4,305 yards. He's going at pick 125. That's a decent value for, what you get out of Ben Roethlisberger. But, the even more exciting thing, like you talked about, is, okay, so what's going to happen with the rest of the team? Let's just start on this team. Let's start with the receivers since we're talking about Antonio Brown being gone.
We have 168 targets of Antonio Brown being gone.
Yeah, Juju Smith-Schuster, I'm not sure that he can really get that many more targets. I guess he could get 200. Either way, I think he's a lock to be one of the top 3 fantasy receivers. Wow. You could tell me you want to draft Devontae Adams over him, and I'd say, okay. You could tell me that, you want to draft DeAndre Hopkins over him. I'd say, okay. After that, I would rather have him over Julio Jones. I'd rather have him over Odell Beckham Jr. I'd rather have him over Mike Evans by far. It's not even close. Like, I would draft him 100 times out of 100 over Mike Evans.
Would you take him at the end of the first round?
Yes. I would take him. Where I will be taking Juju is from pick 9 and on, probably. I'm going to pass on Ingram, due to injury concerns. I'm going to pass on Nick Chubb versus Juju. Give me Juju. And, unless this is a standard league, that weighs things back. I'm talking half point to full point PPR. Juju is going to be a monster. Right now I've got him at 290 points, but notice I've got his floor at 275. His floor and where I've got him projected are so close, and he's got upside because I've only got him at 8 touchdowns. All of a sudden, if he scores 12 touchdowns, he's the number 1 receiver in fantasy football. So he's the kind of player, obviously, that you love. And right now he's going at pick 16. So if you're down around the turn, Juju Smith-Schuster needs to be one of your picks. You can love Odell Beckham Jr., and Odell Beckham Jr. is actually a better NFL receiver as far as being the full threat that can, threaten every area of the field. But this is just going to be a guy that's going to catch a ton of balls. I got him at 108 catches, 1,300 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Now, the next guy, I don't know how many more times I'm going to mention this guy this preseason because I'm kind of torn. You know about him because I just, was all over you the other day about in this dynasty league we're doing together. But the guy that people are sleeping on this guy right now, and this is a league winner. This guy can win your fantasy league for you, and it's James Washington. Now, could James Washington be a miss? Yes, he could be a miss. But he's stepping into a role and he's being given the first shot to come in and take on a huge component of this passing offense. And so James Washington going around 9 and 10 of NFL drafts. I don't even have him graded as some freaking crazy stats, but where he's going in fantasy drafts is absurd. There's not many margins anymore in fantasy football. There's a lot of smart people out there talking this stuff up. To see James Washington going in round 9 or 10, usually if there's any inkling of upside, people overdraft players. Mm-hmm. We see it every year. Like, I love DJ Moore, guy we haven't even gotten to yet. He's going in the 3rd and 4th round. You're to take him in the 3rd and 4th round, you're almost saying he's got to hit the full ceiling of what you project him at. James Washington could easily score as much as DJ Moore. I don't have him projected there, but his upside is as high as DJ Moore's. Because he's stepping into an offense where he has a chance to be the 2, and they've told him, this is yours. We signed Dante Moncrief. He's the security blanket in case you screw up. Yeah, they drafted a guy, in the 3rd round in Deontay Johnson, but we're talking about a rookie from a small school. Deontay Johnson's got stuff to learn. Next year, he'll be more of a concern. James Washington has a huge opportunity. I've only got him projecting at 15% of the targets, and he's already a value at where he's going. He could easily be 20 to 22% of the targets. So this is a guy that has an upside, that's just, it's really big. And if you're drafting right now, all it's going to take is one preseason game where people see that, he actually is playing good and Ben Roethlisberger's throwing the ball. And his ADP is going to shoot up. It's just going to happen unless he just continues to suck, and then we can readjust. But as we sit here right now, if you're drafting early drafts, you need to be drafting James. I am. I'm drafting James Washington and Ronald Jones every draft in round 9, round 10, round 9, round 10, round 9, round 10. Oh, give them to me again. I'm not bored. I'm not bored at all, because those are 2 guys that are stepping into situations where they could have huge role increase in offenses that are going to actually move the ball. That doesn't come along very often, not with a 9th and 10th round price tag. James Washington.
Jameis Winston talking up Ronald Jones today, by the way.
Yeah, I could give 2 shits about Jameis Winston talking him up. All I know is that I've got a roster full of nobodies, and Ronald Jones is still a 2nd round pick. And man, you're getting a guy with Ronald Jones, not to get off on a tangent here, but the same thing. You're getting a guy in the 9th or 10th round, maybe 8th. I'm pulling the trigger on Ronald Jones in the 8th just to make sure I get him. So also I can come back and get James Washington in the 9th. So I don't have to worry about it. And then I'm taking Geronimo Allison in the 10th, and I'm calling it a day. And, those are 3 guys that are way undervalued right now. The 3 most undervalued players in all of fantasy, probably right there right now. So those are guys that you want to get your hands on because, things change. There are seasons to drafting. By the time July gets here, this could all change. James Washington, like I said, the buzz starts coming out, plays a couple preseason games, he's going to be a 6th round pick. It's going to be a 5th round pick. And then all that upside that you were hoping for, that you were getting at a good value, now you're kind of pushed to, well, crap. Now even if he hits his upside, I got to take him in the 5th. He's really got to hit all of it for him to be worth it. Or, I got to be right about this guy because now I'm passing on other guys in the 5th round that may have less questions. A guy we didn't mention, at the end, and that's my fault, of the Bengals, Tyler Boyd's been criminally undervalued as well. He's going in the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds of drafts that I've been doing and stuff I've been seeing. People are just snoozing on Tyler Boyd. That's another guy. So anyway, Deontay Johnson is a guy that if you're in Dynasty, you definitely keep your eyes on. But the other guy to talk about here is Vance McDonald. Mm-hmm. Vance McDonald, even if James Washington hits his hype, there's room for Vance McDonald because Jesse James is gone.
And so are his 40 targets from last year.
Exactly. So if Vance McDonald is just in the same offense he was last year, and let's say all the other Antonio Brown stuff goes to these other guys. Let's say Deontay Johnson and Eli Rogers and Ryan Switzer and obviously James Washington and Juju usurp all that. Vance McDonald just needs to get 80 to 90% of what Jesse James leaves behind and be the main tight end and stay on the field, and he's going to be a top 8 tight end.
He's screaming 70 catches next year. Easily.
Yes, I got him at 65 for 775 and 5. And here's the deal. If James Washington, for some reason, doesn't do well, and Dante Moncrief's, and then Deontay Johnson is a third round pick rookie from a small school like we just talked about, Vance McDonald's upside that I have projected, I've got Vance McDonald. Now, this is in tight end premium. I got him at 208 points, but I've got his ceiling at 275. And that's because his ceiling is he could all of a sudden find himself as the number 2 in this offense. And, I mean, that's huge. I know you, Drake, you and I, we just missed out on him in this dynasty draft. We just started talking about him, and, of course, he gets picked right as it's coming back towards us. And I would have loved to have had the guy because he's still young. If you remember, he's a guy that, the 49ers had extended, then they had a front office changeover, and they had seen things from him, but so they ended up trading him over to the Steelers. Then he finished out the year strong with the Steelers 2 years ago. He had that big playoff game against the Jaguars when Antonio Brown was banged up, and then last year he kind of had to split with Jesse James. This could be McDonald's coming out party. I mean, his floor I've got graded really close to where I've got him graded, period. But I mean, right now I've got him at 775 yards. Like I said, 65 catches. I think his floor is 55 catches. And that's calculating some injury in for him. So I think that Vance McDonald is a big-time steal right now. He's a guy that people should be focused on. So this is just an offense with a ton of value. We haven't even talked about running back yet. Yeah. I will draft James Conner all day long. I will pound my fists until they're bleeding over David Johnson. I like David Johnson. I love David Johnson. He's on one of my dynasty teams. I can't say enough good things about David Johnson, but this team is going to win more games than the Cardinals. This team is going to be a better offense than the Cardinals this year. They don't have a rookie quarterback. They've got an established scheme. James Conner is behind a better offensive line, and James Conner kicked ass last year. I mean, it's funny to me, like how much people want to dismiss him. He's going at pick 12. I have no problem with that. Last year, people forget he got hurt, right? In week 13, he got hurt. His pace before his injury, just take a guess, Drake, at the yards and touchdowns before injury, rushing.
Well, I know what he finished at. So, I mean, he probably would have got 16 touchdowns and, I don't know, 1,100 yards.
Are you cheating?
No,
you nailed it. 16 touchdowns.
I suck at math, but I figured that one out.
1,275 yards. Yes. Are touchdowns the most fluky part of projecting? Yeah, fine. Where do I have him projected this year? I got him at 11. So we can take that down, right? You don't got to project him, but just he was a touchdown. He was great in the red zone, great down near the goal line. The thing that people don't realize is he was on pace for 72 catches.
Exactly.
660 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's what everybody, well, David Johnson's a PPR magnet. 72 catches. David Johnson will be lucky to get to 80 catches this year. So I got a guy with more upside that's going to be playing on a team more likely to win. One thing, if we have folks joining us tonight that didn't hear, some of this stuff in the past, is if you got a running back on a losing team and the Cardinals are projected for 6 wins and you got a quarterback that likes to run the ball, that's just not a good formula for David Johnson. It really caps his upside on touchdowns. There's no way David Johnson's scoring 12 touchdowns. He's going to try to score 6 to 8 because Kyler Murray's going to steal him away. They're going to have games where they can't do crap because Kyler Murray's still going to be a rookie in this league. And they play in a division that, by the way, happens to be pretty good. The Rams will get up on you in a hurry. The Seahawks, they like to play a little bit of defense and keep the ball away from your offense. And the 49ers are a team that should be better. So when I look at this, give me James Conner all day long at pick 12. I would take James Conner at pick 6 or 7 before drafting David Johnson there.
I love it. That, folks, is how you get in-depth in a division right there. Dwain McFarland, I give it to you. Broke it down, my friend. That was a AFC North meat sandwich of fantasy goodness right there. Great stuff.
I don't know how much the audience likes meat sandwiches, but yeah.
Go to Arby's. You'll love a meat sandwich. Arby's will be sponsoring the show next week. But
excellent. We could use a sponsor.
Yeah, we could, or 6 or 7. But that was awesome, man. So thanks so much, Dwain. I appreciate it. Anything else before we get out of here?
No, man. I think, like you said, we hit a lot of stuff. We'll be back next week with. I let Drake pick so I'll let him pick again next week. I'm sure we'll hit an NFC. We'll hit NFC next week, huh?
I can't wait till we get to the NFC East because it's just going to be the Carson Wentz show. But
I'm going to kick back and let you do that one, I think. Let you talk Carson Wentz.
Check us out over at FightingChanceFantasy.com. I am Brian Drake. He is Dwain McFarland, at Drake Fantasy, at Dwain McFarland. Thank you, folks. We appreciate it. Tell a friend about the show. We'll see you next week. Take care.
This has been the Tuesday Night Hustle. We're back next week with all you need for waiver wire, trades, roster management, and more. Until then, never get out hustled.